Hopefully everything is okay. Okay, awesome.
Yep, looks good on my end.
Awesome. Well, hello and welcome, SuccessGrid Nation, to this live episode of the SuccessGrid podcast with your host, Hussein Talib. In this episode, I have with me now Keegan Hadley. He is a doctor of occupational therapy, a psychiatric and neurological clinical researcher, and an Amazon best-selling author who specializes in using psychological treatments such as ACT, which is acceptance and commitment therapy, with his clients. Keegan, welcome to the SuccessGrid podcast.
Hey, how you doing?
Awesome to have you here. So first of all, Keegan, I want you to tell the SuccessGrid Nation, what do you think or believe success is, and do you agree or disagree with people's definition of success?
I think success is getting to do what you want and being fulfilled through what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. And obviously that is very subjective depending on, what really fills up your cup, so to speak. So generally people only look at success as far as, money earned or maybe even degrees or those kinds of things. But I mean, there's many different indicators of success. So.
Yeah. So now, do you think, how important do you think someone psychological well-being is important? Like in general, we humans have lots of things that we deal with. We deal with other people who might be negative or positive, our mind, how it works. So a lot of things. So for you, these kind of things will drive us to success, but at the same time, failure could. So how do we humans should approach our psychological being?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, we need to approach it as any other facet of our health. Obviously, if your nutrition is very, very poor, it might not today or tomorrow come back to bite you in the rear end, but eventually it will. If you get morbidly obese or whatever the case may be, that's going to affect you somewhere down the line, even if it's not in the moment. The same can be said for psychologically. If you're disregarding the different red flags and the poor actions you're taking on a day-to-day basis, eventually that will come back to have, negative consequences on your life and relationships.
So, like, how do you, for example, yourself deal with, let's say, example, trauma or pain or these kind of things? Because in general, we are humans each day of our life. Sometimes things happen, could be unexpected, right? So what would be your reaction to something bad happening to you, and how do you deal with your clients in that regard also?
The best way to look at any trauma or failure even is to take what you can from that situation and learn from it, because you can actually learn. I mean, there's a lot of coaches with the famous saying is something to the effect of, you learn a lot more from a loss or in, particular situations, a trauma than you would a success. You can learn, what not to do and how to make sure to set yourself up to not follow that same path again. And getting clients to understand that is definitely one of the harder things, because a lot of people try to not think about failures or trauma. That's their way to cope with it, is they try to avoid it at all costs. So being able to evaluate that situation, trauma or failure, and gain what you can from it is very, very important.
Yeah, so because this is like we humans in general, we always try to avoid the pain, though sometimes pain is, I don't know, is there some kind of pains that a human should experience, do you think?
I think pain is an imperative in human life. I mean, it's been ingrained in us, for evolutionarily for a very, very long time. If you put your hand on a stove that's on, you're probably not going to do that more than once because of the pain. It's a learning mechanism. It's your body's way to, alert you to something that's not quite right inside. So if you avoid that, or you don't want to experience that, you're putting yourself, in a situation where you could be susceptible to various other kinds of pain, just being because you weren't given those red flags beforehand that the pain would have, allowed you to understand about the situation you were in. So
Yes. So we as a humans, we have to have this psychological flexibility. Can you tell us some kind of a story personally or that you've been through or you know about how can humans be like flexible and because sometimes this what controls is the mind and sometimes the mind likes as we are talking here about does not like to mention or bring on let's say negative experiences, right?
yep. So psychological flexibility is essentially an umbrella that acceptance and commitment therapy, as well as relational frame theory, fall under. They're very similar to they're like close cousins, I guess, as far as relationally to cognitive behavioral therapy, which is widely practiced. If someone goes to a psychologist or a therapist, counselor, the intervention that they're likely using on you is cognitive behavioral therapy. And it's a slight difference from that for acceptance and commitment therapy, where CBT looks to minimize the negative symptoms associated with your condition, and acceptance and commitment therapy looks to kind of prepare you for the inevitable, because life happens. We all live in a fallen world. So I mean, there's going to be challenges, that come upon us, whether that's a loss in the family, again, a failure or a trauma that we spoke to previously. Something like that is going to happen in your future, and that's inevitable. So it's just preparing you for that. And the way it does that is it doesn't really look to avoid those kinds of poor feelings, again, that we kind of spoke to. There's 6 foundational principles to acceptance and commitment therapy, and I'd be more than willing to go into each of those if that's what you'd like.
Yeah, sure. Please expand on that.
Yep. So there's, like I said, there's 6 foundational kind of pillars or principles of ACT. The first one, which was, very, very important for me personally, was diffusion. Essentially, diffusion is the ability to gain separation between perseverative negative thoughts. For myself personally, that was I am broken. I've had mental health struggles for as long as I can remember, panic attacks and those kinds of things. So as an athlete, I went through tearing both of my ACLs, requiring 4 surgeries. So I just had kind of the ingrained feeling that I am broken. That was my perseverative negative thought. And diffusion allowed me to realize I am not broken. Those are just words. I am just having thoughts or feelings that I am broken. That's essentially what the first principle is. The second one, which we spoke about previously, was acceptance, and that's not acceptance like standing in a corner and just kind of accept what happened to you. That's not the way that works. It's evaluating those situations or traumas, failures that you endured previously, and learning what you can from them so you don't repeat. You don't go down that same path, which is very, very important. The third principle is mindfulness, which is very widely understood. Most times it's living in the moment. It's not looking ahead or behind, because likely if you do that, you're going to be either apprehensive, anxious, or depressed. There's self is a context, which is the 4th pillar. And essentially that posits that there is 2 versions of ourself that go out into the world each day. The first one, and it's the one that most people are using, I would say a majority of the time, is essentially a mask or a persona that we're trying to put forward. It's for football players, is just as an example, since I was one for a long time, we tend to think anyways, we're tough, cool, no emotions, those kinds of things. And then underneath that is the true version of ourselves. Those are our true feelings, emotions, and who we really are as a person. The 5th foundational principle of ACT is we have obviously action, which without the rest would be completely useless, because if you're not applying any of these, it's really not going to be effective in any way. So yep. Do you have any other questions or concerns?
Yeah, so now, for example, you've been an athlete. And me, what you are talking here, for example, about like American football, right? So
Mhm.
I'm a fan of football, like so
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so like sometimes you see these athletes like yourself have these kind of injuries, right? And they
Mhm.
were like performing their performance were like high performance, but for some reason most of them, from what I am seeing, for example, after these kind of injuries, ACLs and these kind of things that are really bad, when they come back after 6 months or a year, right? It's like their performance in general kind of dropped. I don't know if it's the performance is down or is it some kind of fear from the player, for example, that it was a severe injury and I don't want to have this injury again. So what's your look on this situation from your experience?
Yep, that's actually has a specific term, and it's definitely a fear. Essentially, it's called kinesiophobia, and it's essentially the fear of having that same injury again. Because as an athlete, if you're going to go through your sport, no matter what it is, no matter whether it's football or American football or whatever the case may be, these athletes are doing the same motion over and over and over. And we're accustomed to our body working in a certain way. And one time, for whatever reason, a lot of times, maybe they, like myself, had a non-contact injury where they were doing a movement that they've done thousands of times before that. But whatever the case, for whatever reason, their body gave out. And a small 1 by 1.5 inch ligament gave out and kind of changed their athletic life forever. So it's kind of fear of having to restart that process because it's a long, arduous process, and it's something that you never really had to think of before as an athlete. So
Yeah, it's a tough situation, but how do you deal with that, and why not? Like for example, if someone known for their high performance, why do you wanna let your performance drop just based on the fear of having this situation again? Is there something that can prevent this from happening again? Certain things like you talked about mindfulness, for example,
Mhm.
maybe there are some certain practices that can remove the fear and at the same time improve your movement as a, for example, as an athlete, if we're talking about athletes also.
Yep, I have a very holistic approach on joint recovery. So I go through, the entire mental side of things. That's very important, and it's a very large portion of it because of all the fear associated with returning to play. But as far as getting back into your sport, you can't discount the physical type of training that you're going to have to do. It's going to have to be very joint specific. A lot of people go into the gym and they're more so working out to, get bigger muscles or whatever the case may be. And it's going to be very different type of training that you're going to have to do that. It's very joint centric. It's not necessarily, you will gain bigger muscles from it if you do it correctly, but I mean, it's definitely not the the sexiest workouts that you're going to be doing. And if you continue to incrementally improve the ability of your joint the way I have, you'll eliminate the fear of re-injury, because what you have been doing, if you keep down that path, will be much more difficult on your body than actually your sport will. The reason people have a lot of apprehension about returning to their sport is the return to play criteria that people generally go through a physio or a physical therapist isn't quite sufficient to make them feel comfortable going back into their sport. For example, I played on defense in American football, where you line up from, the extremely large individuals that are, over 300 pounds. So the triple hop test, which is a very important test for return to play for ACL patients, which is literally when you stand on your injured leg, the leg that was likely operated on, and you hop as far as you can 3 times. That the result of that test isn't exactly conducive to me lining up against a 6'5", 300-pound guy that may or may not dive at my knee. I mean, there's one that's definitely a lot more intense than the other, and I'm sure there's very similar situations with your type of football as well, where the triple hop test isn't really conducive to doing certain soccer movements or
Yeah.
so yeah, that's what I would say.
In sport, yeah, in sport in general, whether they're like running athlete, running marathon, or whatever type of sport it is, right? So I don't know. Do you think how important is the mentality should be there? Because if you don't have it in your head, you don't have it in your body, right? Because
Yeah, it's one of those things where athletes generally, just speaking in generalities, uh, we're not known for being super, having a lot of really positive coping mechanisms besides our sport. So if you don't have that, if you don't have these processes in place, once your sport is removed, if you're injured for a long period of time, like an Achilles injury, an ACL injury, a Tommy John injury for baseball players where they're out of their sport for a long time, you're kind of left to your own devices as far as how you deal with the stresses of day-to-day life. And that's it's going to be likely negative. You're going to usually go down the substance abuse path or have lash out at people around you, which definitely isn't a positive way to deal with these things. So if you have the positive coping mechanisms in place in order to deal with these things, your rehabilitation will only be, much, much more effective.
yeah. So now, for example, in your own business, like I'm sure you might have had some kind of difficulties or failures or something that did not work in your way. So
Yep.
how did you deal with that yourself?
As far as from a business perspective, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, certainly. I started a blog because one of the things I noticed immediately following my injury is I had a very large lack of information about what was going on with me. I mean, generally, when you're with a physician, you're with them for, under 5 minutes, and they can't really provide you everything you need. So that's needless to say, I sought out to fill a lot of that information so someone in my situation could just Google it and it would come up for them. That being said, I didn't know some of the more technical things of starting a blog, like connecting it to, Google Search Console, Google Analytics, those kinds of things. And it made it so the first 80 of my posts or so weren't getting indexed. So I've been fighting with that ever since. I'm getting it fixed, obviously, and I've came a long way, but that was definitely, a struggle that I've had to overcome. And the way you do that is you just, again, you evaluate what you did wrong and how you could prevent that going forward. So now whenever I start a new platform, a new, facet of my business, I make sure I know all of the ins and outs before going forward. Any potential roadblocks, I meet with those who have already done what I'm looking to do. And they can kind of, one of the best questions to ask anyone, I can't recommend it more highly enough, is getting a mentor in whatever you're trying to do. Someone who's already succeeded in what you're trying to do, and asking them, if you were me, knowing what you know now, how would you proceed, right out of the gate? Because you can alleviate a lot of the pitfalls that most people fall into.
So, for example, what would you say some best tools, resources, for example, or books that you would recommend for people to go through?
Books. I'm on kind of a novel kick right now. So not as far as, I'm not reading a lot of nonfiction at the moment. Mostly I finished A Tale of Two Cities probably about, I don't know, a few weeks ago, and I'm on to other things now, but nothing from a nonfiction standpoint that's super helpful. Well, I guess I should. There's a very helpful Amazon ads book that I read probably end of fourth quarter that's been very, very helpful to what I'm doing. Obviously, I'm an author, so that's helped me quite a bit. And I can't remember the exact title of it, but if you search Amazon ads and then Brian Cohen, it's a fantastic book, and it's cut my advertising costs in half, and I doubled my revenue. So I'm very, very pleased with that. So
Cool, awesome. So can you add something that you think I missed asking you about here that might be important as a final takeaway for this episode?
No, I mean, if there's anything else pertinent to, obviously entrepreneurship or, anything like that, I'm always open to asking that because there's a lot of different fields that I'm kind of involved in. So I'm always happy to answer any of those kinds of questions, kind of following your, using what you know to get into, new niches and those kinds of things. But if there's nothing else on your end, I'm not gonna obviously make you say anything. So.
Awesome. Well, where can people get in touch with you so they can learn more about you and what you do, Keegan?
Yep. Yeah. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter. I'll admit I'm not, the most active as far as posting on my own yet. That's, a goal I have moving forward, but I'm very reactive as far as if you shoot me an email. My handles are at the ACL Therapist for both Twitter and Instagram. And you can find me at my website at theacltherapist.com or keeganhadley.com.
So awesome. Thank you, Keegan, for being on this episode of the SuccessGrid podcast.
Thank you so much.